Bienvenue dans ce nouvel épisode. Ce webinaire aborde un sujet clé. Comment la communication publique peut renforcer la fiabilité des institutions démocratiques. Des experts en engagement citoyen, gouvernance publique, communication institutionnelle et médias partagent leurs analyses sur la lutte contre la désinformation, l'importance d'une information crédible et le rôle des médias dans la participation citoyenne. Ce webinaire s'inscrit dans le projet européen TrueDem financé par Horizon Europe.
Namely in the area of competencies related to reliability and responsiveness, and then in the area of values, integrity, openness, and fairness. And in 2023, we implemented the survey for a second time in 30 OECD countries, and this is following the 2022 Luxembourg Declaration, where our member countries decided that the survey should be carried out every 2 years. And we are currently preparing the next survey wave that will be carried out in fall of this year. And in addition to working with OECD countries, we have now established the Global Trust Survey Project, which allows us to also work with democratic countries that are not part of the OECD. And we are starting with a regional edition of the Trust Survey in Latin America and the Caribbean this year. And in our general OECD Trust Survey, we are also including the European OECD accession candidates. But turning to the results of the 2023 survey, we see that despite increasing concerns about, in particular, cost of living and wars in Europe and the Middle East, trust levels eroded, but did not drastically fall compared to 2021. So in particular, in 2023, 39% on average across the participating OECD countries of the adult population reported high or moderately high trust, and 44% low or no trust. And this is on a question on a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 to 4 counts as low or no trust, 6 to 10 as high or moderately high trust, and then 5 we categorize as neutral. And of course, trust levels vary across public institutions, with the highest average across country of trust in the police at 63%, and the lowest in political parties. Looking at the evolution for the 18 countries for which we tracked trust in the national government in both 2021 and 2023, we saw a decline in the share with high, moderately high trust from 43 to 41%. But of course, there are important differences in countries with substantial increases in trust, in particular in Colombia, but also in Australia, Canada, France, Latvia, and Sweden. Looking at differences in trust levels within a country, we find that really the point that stands out most is whether our respondent feels that people like him or her have a say in what government does, which is associated with a 47% percentage point gap in trust. Whereas sort of the trust gaps that we see by socioeconomic or demographic background are much smaller. But of course, there are many surveys that measure trust levels. So really, what makes our survey stand out is that we also try to understand what, in terms of the public perceptions of public governance, affects trust levels. And here we see that in 2023, a sort of relatively good levels of satisfaction of respondents with their day-to-day interactions with public institutions help to maintain trust levels of different public institutions. So, for example, we see that a majority across our participating countries of recent users of healthcare, education, or administrative services are satisfied with these services, with a particularly high satisfaction when it comes to administrative services. For healthcare and education, we saw some declines in satisfaction compared to 2021, and these declines were stronger for healthcare. which we think is related in part to potentially particularly positive perceptions of the healthcare system in 2021, but then also potentially still some of the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But even when it comes to day-to-day interactions, there are dimensions in which public institutions could still improve to better meet people's expectations in terms of responsiveness, openness, and integrity in particular. So, for example, we see that only 4 in 10 people believe that they would be able to voice their opinion on a matter that affects their local community, and only 36% find it likely that a public employee would refuse to accept money in return for speeding up access to service. But of course, governments are not only in the business of ensuring smooth day-to-day interactions and the delivery of public services. So we also looked at how people perceived policymaking and decision-making on long-term and complex policy issues. And in this area, we see higher levels of skepticism, and this can negatively impact trust, in particular when we look at trust in the national government. So more positively, we still see that a majority of people find it likely that government institutions would be ready to protect people's lives in case of a large-scale emergency. But then when we look at a few other complex policy issues, sort of that level of confidence goes down. So for example, 41% on average of our respondents find it likely that government would regulate new technologies appropriately and help businesses and individuals make the most of these new technologies. And only 37% are confident that the national government balances fairly between the interests of current and future generations. So of course, taking decisions on complex policy issues is inherently difficult. There are large unknowns that governments have to deal with when they take decisions, and there are legitimate trade-offs between different policy goals or between the interests of different groups. So in some sense, it's not surprising that these perceptions are less positive than when we compare them to sort of people's perceptions on day-to-day interactions with public institutions. But we also, our results also suggest that some of the skepticism on these public governance dimensions are related to sort of a sense that decisions are not necessarily taken in the public interest. So for example, here, you see that only 3 in 10 people find it likely that their government would refuse a corporation's demand for a public policy that could be in the interest of the corporation's industry, but might be harmful to the public interest. And we also see that only 3 in 10 people believe that the political system allows people like them to have a say in what government does. There's also skepticism that decisions are always evidence informed, and I can talk about that a little bit more later. Just before I finish, I want to just present an overview of our analysis when it comes to areas of policy focus that could, if perceptions improve, also contribute to increasing levels of trust in different public institutions. And what we did here is, so we ran logit regressions to analyze the link between trust in the different public institutions and the public governance drivers, obviously controlling, for example, country fixed effects, and the respondents' personal background, including their level of interpersonal trust. But we also combined sort of the average marginal effects that we found from this analysis with information on how positive perceptions of the driver are already. So this means that, for example, satisfaction with administrative services that you see here, which has sort of, we see as like having a lower potential positive effect on trust in the national government, but still positive. This is further left than it would be if current satisfaction levels were lower than they currently are, because obviously there's sort of a ceiling of how many people we think will ever be satisfied with a given driver. So I will talk more later on about some of the specific drivers when it comes to trust in national government, but just to find before I finish, just wanted to mention two things. And this is in particular when we sort of look at the importance of positive perceptions on day-to-day interactions versus positive perceptions on decision-making on complex policy issues. We sort of see a bifurcation where when it comes to trust in the civil service, what matters most, with the exception of whether people feel like they have a voice in what government does, what really matters are sort of these day-to-day interactions, which makes sense because, you know, that's sort of what the civil service is there for, to facilitate, or at least from the perspective of citizens, that's sort of a core function. Whereas when we look at trust in the national government, the factors that are really associated with higher trust levels here are those that are related to complex policy issues, with sort of the three that stand out are evidence-informed decision-making, intergenerational equity, and political voice. And I think I will, with this, I will pass back to the moderators, and I'm very happy to obviously go into more depth on some of these issues later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very interesting presentation. I'm sure we will get back with questions and reflection during the Q&A session. And now we will pass the floor to Mario Schaffer-Dilling with his presentation on trustworthy public communication. Mario, the floor is yours. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Mario, but we can't hear you, so maybe you can unmute if you unmute it.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Had to switch to headphones so you don't hear my kids, but very good. Let me share the screens again. Okay, great. So what I just said, many thanks for the invitation, and I think it's a very topical theme at the moment, obviously. So happy to be in this discussion. And it's very good to see some familiar faces. I see Fred, Christian, I don't know if Pippa's in the room, experts we've worked with in the past. So glad to see you're still working on this and making it better. And I could also not be having a better speaker before me than Sarah, who teed up a lot of insights that we need for making our case for trustworthy public communication. But before this, just to say, this is the latest report in a series of reports that we have published in recent years, always with the help of experts such as you, either in directly writing those or in giving us all the studies and research that's needed to make sense of what's happening out there at the moment. So I'm giving back basically to the audience here to say, please keep up your good work. That is the basis on which we do science advice in the JRC to the European Union. And that's very important to me to say up front. But now, just diving directly into our latest report on trustworthy public communication, And how we did this. The typical way of how we work is that we do usually a multidisciplinary state-of-the-art scientific review with experts such as you, and importantly, multidisciplinary always, because science advice shouldn't be singled out to one dimension or one discipline. It's really important to bring everything together. And for this study, we also did a couple of new interviews and surveys for this testing, for example, values-based messaging, ethics research questions, but also pre and debunking. And importantly, we thought, well, specifically for a topic of of trustworthy public communication, we also did engage citizens in 9 member states to ask them what do they think is ethical and meaningful communication. And it all flowed into this report. And the one important thing up front, what we heard, especially from the citizen engagement exercises, where that when we think about public communication as researchers, obviously we have very particular sets of communication in mind, how this works. The same is true for the colleagues that I usually speak to in the European Commission, in the Parliament. When they think about communication, it's something like this. So, like press conferences, nice social media tweets, or websites, the way we present ourselves and how we want to be seen. But citizens tell us basically we don't differentiate between all the ways we interact with the government. And I think this is something that comes back from Sarah's presentation as well. All of this is one melange, one interaction that we have, and we don't separate between the different types of communication we see very much. Also not between political communication and public administration communication. This all comes in at the same time. And I always like to add this picture for the EU as how they see communication coming from us usually. So whatever we do and how we see public communication, it should be through the angle of where it now is in the environment. Obviously, this means most people nowadays see their news through algorithmically curated platforms who then show them a lot of content that already aligns with the things they feel are important, and they don't see any information or less information, let's say it this way, that disagrees with them. And that's a huge driver of our polarization at the moment. But so what do we recommend based on all this evidence, what communicators should do? And this goes primarily to public communicators, so communicators who work in public institutions such as governments, also local public administrations or international organizations. But I think these recommendations that we give apply to many communicators who are meaningful and want to be ethically doing this. And the first one, I probably do it like Sarah and say, I don't need to convince you all that trust is relevant here. But what we say is that building trust should be the main or primary goal by being trustworthy at all times. And why we say this is that we say, okay, we cannot demand trust of citizens. We cannot tell them, okay, you should trust us more. We need to show that we are worthy of the trust by acting in such a way that they recognize that what we're doing is in their interests. And this adds in very nicely with the book by Pippa in 2022, where it basically shows, yes, there is a clear correlation between governance quality and trust. And we really want to have skeptical trust, meaning those who can verify whether what they receive is also good, rather than credulous trust, where it's basically blind trust that we do not want. Then the second one, and that ties into the discussion of what do people see as one of the biggest issues hindering trust. And we saw it in this wonderful summary graph that was just presented from the OECD survey, namely that political voice matters a lot. And we say public communicators should invest more in effective ways of listening to citizens to increase trust in public administrations at all levels, I should add here. And I mean, on the one hand, we see that this is a very impactful factor because many people think they do not have voice on the politics of the day. And the second part of the statement is more about that we need to invest in effective ways of listening, meaning it's not about just being on social media platforms and also spreading our messages there and broadcasting them. It's about creating environments where people can exchange their views in a meaningful way, such as debates, progress topics, rather than what current social media platforms specifically are geared towards more engagement, more addiction, more time spent, which is facilitated by very emotional and outrageous content. So we really need to invest in this, and I just mentioned a few examples of how the European Commission tries to do this. By no means do I want to imply that we're doing it perfectly, but I do think that there's some developments that we are going in the right direction. For example, a recent strategic dialogue on the future of the EU agriculture, which happened after we had seen mass protests in Brussels of farmers, but also in other member states, of farmers who were very discontent. And this dialogue was facilitated in such a way that trust was built within the debate, such that you could move on to discuss the topic at heart. So if you don't build the trust up front with the right facilitation methods, you do not generate this trust, and you do not allow the debate to go into detail of what you want. We've initiated also European citizens panels, now also online, and these are meant to be used. So for those of you who don't know, maybe all commissioners of the European Commission got mission letters from Ursula von der Leyen, our president, saying you need, as a part of your tasks, to engage with citizens on a regular basis, to make them see and to listen to them, to create a lasting culture of participatory democracy. I think this is already a sign that we want to do more, even if we're perhaps not perfect there yet. Now, having established trust and having established kind of a trustworthy pattern of listening to citizens to do it the right way, we say that then our goals can range, as communicators, can range from informing to behavioral change. But we should be clear and transparent about what we try to achieve up front, so we are acting ethically. And basically, we condense all of this into one infographic where we say, yes, the default of our communication should be to increase agency of citizens so that we inform them such that they can make the best decisions for themselves. That's this kind of decision support. And for these different types of goals, whether it's informing or belief change or behavior change, we also describe different types of modes of communication that are most effective in achieving this. In this case, it would be evidence communication, and there are some guidelines on what evidence communication would mean. But there are also some areas where to attempting behavioral change is also legitimate. Why, for example, in this case of what I showed earlier as what communication entails, is also, for example, campaigns to increase road safety. Usually road safety is something that citizens agree broadly. We need this. And their behavioral change is a legitimate goal that people care about. And what we need to, and then we can use, for example, persuasion as a mode. But we also need to understand that especially institutions such as the EU or national governments also use coercion, meaning we make laws that if you do not behave in line with those, that then, yeah, there are consequences to this. And we put this in this graph because we want to make really sure that people, especially in public institutions, understand that when they communicate about those, that the impact on autonomy of citizens is immense. And that is usually where protests arise. And therefore, at this point, the ethical relevance is much higher. And we need to make sure that our messages align with citizens' concern, that we listen more, and that we act in the right way. Then the next key recommendations, I won't dive too much into detail now because we don't have that much time. Mostly they're concerned with how to communicate in an effective way, for example, using behavioral insights, how to use framing narratives, but also how to engage with emotions in the right way or uncertainty. And then how to learn about the audience, which I think the experts in the room are actually much more knowledgeable about this topic. So I won't dive into this, but I'm happy to answer any questions later on this. But what I do want to point out is that there's a current trend also driven by the more and more availability of highly personalized data. And we say, well, this is all nice and well, that we have this data available and that we could individualize our persuasion attempts. But as public communicators, we should not do that. Also, because it's no longer allowed for political organizations under the new political advertising regulation that was adopted last year at the EU level, and where the Commission is imminent to post guidelines for the national member states to see and to give guidance of how we can regulate this in detail. And it's not allowed because of several drawbacks, such as a further fragmenting of the population, but also because we want to protect vulnerable people from being manipulated in an undue fashion. And one alternative that we presented with our extra research that we do is to think about values from multiple angles and then create messages that resonate with all parts of society. And this data that we present in the report is based on a Eurobarometer that we had designed together with Fred and Christian and others for the previous report, but we did dig deeper into the results and formed clusters based on the orientation towards specific values and identities that people showed. And for each of those in the report, we show what do these groups care about the most, what are their main concerns, and how can we develop messages that resonate with them. And importantly, we also tested whether the combination, so putting different values messages together, works as well. And it does. So meaning there's no decrease of putting different values messages together that at some point address traditionalists and progressives at the same time. And we asked whether citizens find this ethical, and they do as well. So I think that is actually good news. We don't need this personalization, but we can actually create messages that are informative and persuasive and ethical at the same time by understanding better what people really care about at the core. And then last messages before I hand over back to you are concerned specifically with how public communicators should acknowledge public concerns preemptively, not only listening, but also communicating before we have the perfect policy solution and saying, yes, this is important, but when people care about an issue being at the forefront of the agenda, is usually at the time when policy discussions happen, when decisions are not yet taken, and that is when misinformation takes root. And so if we do not provide qualitative and highly reliable information at that point, then we lost the battle already. And so we say really we need to inform upfront. This is what we are discussing. This is what where we will do legislation or new laws or new initiatives, and therefore people can find reliable information at that time. And then lastly, and I think this resonates very well with scientists, we need to evaluate more what we do and exchange competences, knowledge, and skills for public communicators to upskill our game. The report is highly functional. We put a lot of tools and guidance in there on how to do all of this, which I skip now because I want to do one final call. The European Commission has just published at the end, the 31st of March, the consultation on the Democracy Shield, the big initiative that we are putting forward at the end of this year of how to protect European democracy from, yeah, well, everything that happens at the moment, I would say. And all of you can comment on this, give us your input, give us your research for what we should do. And please do it. Please engage in the debate, because only then can we generate and create good laws that really do what we want them to do. And with this, I thank you very much. I'm happy to engage in discussion.
Thank you for very inspiring insight. And now we will shift from ethical and trustworthy communication to media communication. Our next speaker, Elias Spiridu, will present an interesting case study on influence of media and narratives on democracy. So, Elias,
hello, thank you. It is a pleasure to participate in this webinar dealing with a hot topic in both research and political life. Let me share my screen. Sorry for that. Okay, so My contribution to this discussion actually comes from the Horizon 2020 project Demotech, whose aim was to investigate whether and how participatory budgeting, a democratic innovation via which citizens are given the opportunity to say how public budget will be spent, can actually improve citizen engagement at the local level and help citizens reconnect with policymaking processes. So apart from analyzing the determinants of effective citizen engagement in PB or applying different methods in practice to see what works best, one of the main objectives of the project was to investigate the role of the media in supporting and promoting PB. Sorry about that. Obviously, the project is driven by the challenges facing a representative democracy, and I think that was well explained by the speakers before me. So one of the main questions is how can governments better connect with citizens and regain trust? And to answer this question, a growing body of normative-driven research promotes participatory and deliberative models of democracy. So under these models, the idea is to develop democratic innovations, namely tools and processes that can support citizens' engagement and participation in policymaking as a remedy to the malaise of representative democracy. However, limited participation in political processes is well documented, and the same applies for democratic innovations, some of which are not widely acknowledged, let alone used by citizens. And here comes the media. As we all know, the media have a critical role in raising awareness and facilitating understanding of issues and political processes. And I also need to make a remark here that despite the growing penetration of social media as an information source, professional media, legacy media still set the agenda and tend to attract a significant people to news. So the question is, are the media willing to support and promote democratic innovations? And when we say support and promotion, are the media willing to cover PB, and other democratic innovations adequately to explain what they're all about, to inspire and facilitate participation during the implementation of a PB, to hold local authorities accountable before and after, and finally to assess the impact of such democratic innovations on the community. So coming back to some of the findings, the first one is that coverage of PB is growing, but tends to be superficial. To be a little more specific, as we can see, the figures show that the diffusion of reporting on PB is increasing over time. And this is understandable because PB is more frequently used during the last years. And this upward trend remains steady even when we exclude or include the Spanish corpus. And this is important because the corpus was compiled using keywords in 8 languages. And of course, Spanish is widely spoken. So this is why we did this with the Spanish corpus. The next step was to measure the relevance of PB in media stories. In other words, how important the topic of PB was to the overall story. And as we can see in the figure, at the aggregate level, there is an equal split on the binary relevance measure. So approximately half of the news stories are not about PB, but rather tackle different topics. And PB is simply referenced or typically a single sentence. However, looking at the first panel, we see that about 1/3 of news stories have a high or very high relevance score, which means that these news stories are either exclusively dedicated to the topic of PB or PB is the primary topic. And one of the assumptions besides these findings is that PB tends to be covered predominantly through press releases or other standardized means of news production, rather than a topic which deserves committed reporting. So the next step involved to see how PB is actually represented. And here we can see the framing matrix which emerged from our sample. And as we can see, the positive frames and subframes dominate. So PB is associated with accountability, empowerment, justice. And there are some negative frames which have to do with resources, mainly when trying to implement APB, and conflict. Here, what is meant is the potential of PB to fuel political or partisan conflict. So going to see how these frames were actually used in the news stories, we can see that overall, PB coverage is positive. However, what is interesting in these two graphs is the correlation between relevance of coverage and negative framing. So what we see here is that when journalists delve a little bit further into the PB, then some negative frames are more likely to emerge. And as you can see here, this is more evident in the Dutch, German, and Spanish-speaking news media. So taking into account these results, we want the journalists themselves to find out the reviews on PB and to find out basically why PB is not a very newsworthy news story. So the results are not very encouraging, I must admit. First of all, attitudes towards PB and other democratic innovations were mixed. There were cases where the same respondents expressed positivity and skepticism at the same time. So on one hand, PB is seen as a viable tool for increasing participation and engagement of the citizens. But at the same time, three main concerns emerged. The first one had to do with PB and other democratic innovations being complicated in terms of design and the overall process. Another criticism, which has to do with this one, had to do with the possibility of journalists to be able to monitor the PB and hold local authorities accountable. Many journalists in all 7 countries that we studied expressed concerns that these processes are not transparent enough and local authorities do not provide the necessary means for journalists to check upon them. And finally, and I think that was mentioned by the previous speaker, it is very important to run PBs or other democratic innovations that have an impact. Not to run a PB for the sake of doing a participatory project, but not aiming for substantial change and improvement, because in this case, the whole process tends to be discredited. Interestingly enough, journalists find citizens capable to participate in a constructive manner. And when we say in a constructive manner, journalists think of citizens as capable, as having the skills and the knowledge to propose issues, to be funded, to be able to deliberate and argue about stuff. However, they are not very sure that citizens have the interest and motivation or long-term mindset to do so, to participate repeatedly in such processes. And another issue that emerged that was a little bit critical of democratic innovations was the issue of representation. So the usual concerns came up that more educated citizens are more likely to engage in deliberative processes. And of course, that in such projects, the usual suspects, for example, activists, NGOs, or interest groups, have a tendency to dominate these processes. And another important finding was why PB is not a newsworthy item. And apparently, it does not meet the professional values and story requirements that would make it newsworthy in the contemporary media landscape and the contemporary news values. So nowadays, the media tend to have an audience-driven agenda where content is shaped based on public interest and engagement. However, PB is viewed as a low-interest item for the majority of citizens. Another thing is that journalists prefer easy to digest stories that are more likely to be read and shared on social media, while PB is seen as a complicated issue without clear results. Additionally, there is a preference for stories that are easily produced, and when they say easily produced, that do not require many resources, whereas PB is difficult to explain and follow. And last but not least, PB, due to its local character, is deemed more suitable for local media, and local journalism is actually dying. So I will stop here and come later with some final remarks about these studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, very much for the presentation. And with no further delay, I pass the floor to Judith Ferrando and ask her to share with us her experiences gained from extensive work with public actors and participatory process.
Are you waiting for me?
Yes.
Hello, really sorry because your sound is very low. It's perfect for speakers, but with the room, it is very low, so sorry. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Do you hear me well?
Very
Perfect.
well.
So thank you a lot for the invitation. It is really interesting, and thank you of the three precedent speakers, because there is a lot of relationship between your studies and your finding and what I will share with you. And for the first thing is that for Leah, there is a lot of similar findings about how the media could cover the democratic field and especially the mini publics. So let me just jump into our topic. As you said before, I work in Mission Publique, and my daily job is to organize and to moderate and sometimes to assess mini public. And to make short a long story, as you know, a participatory process is a way to create an informed public opinion on complex topics to improve quality of decision making. And in this kind of process, like citizen assembly, like the European citizen panels, as you have told a little bit on it just before, the participants, mostly ordinary people, take time between 1 to 10 days to discuss together, to gather information, to exchange views, to debate, and at the end, to formulate well-founded recommendations together. And in this kind of process, the question of trust is central. And what I would like to develop in my speech is 3 points. The question of trust in this kind of participatory process. The second point is about how to guarantee this trust. And the third point is about some idea of proposal to improve the trust in this kind of process. Okay for you? So let's go. Well, as you have already noticed, the question of trust is in the heart of the deployment of participatory process. At the end of the 90s, researchers identified 3 reasons for the use of participatory process throughout the world. The first reason is management objective, to improve public policies by responding better to demand. The second reason is a social objective, to improve the living condition of the most disadvantaged and to reduce inequality. And it was the case, for example, with the participatory budget in Brazil. And the third objective is a political objective, is to restore legitimacy to political choices by involving citizens beyond the simple act of voting. Because there is a crisis of confidence in representative democracy. And this third reason is the last reason, but not the least reason. It's the most frequently quoted by the politician. They use expression like improving dialogue, reconnecting people and elected people, understanding each other better, and so on. But as you know, the trust cannot be decreed. The question is how can we create practical guarantees of trust in participatory process? And what does it mean concretely for us as practitioners paid by public authority to develop this kind of guarantee of trust? Well, I will insist on 3 ways to guarantee this trust, because part of our job is to create this kind of framework of trust for citizens. And to create this framework, we have to say really clearly some rules. And sometimes this rules is also a negotiation with the public client, because in participatory process, we need strong commitment, and public authorities has to be really clear on these commitments, and to decide these commitments, they must accept to take strong commitment and to have confidence to the citizen, even if the public authorities don't know the end of the movie. In another way, they have to accept that they cannot control or anticipate, and they must trusting citizens in order citizens trust them. It is a circular, a virtuous circle. But in another way, it's a question of sharing power. So the first part is to have a clear remit, a clear mandate, written and public. It is the case, for instance, for the European Citizen Panel, we have a clear mandate given to the citizen. This remit, this mandat, in French we say mandat de participation, will tell what is the subject, why is it being discussed by the public today, what is open for discussion, and also what is non-negotiable into this discussion with citizens. But also, it will force the commissioner to commit in terms of publicizing the citizens' recommendation, in terms of instruction, in terms of follow-up and feedback to citizens. And sometimes, even if it is really clear, it happens some test of trust during the process. I would like to share just 1 or 2 examples on it. For instance, during the French Citizen Convention, the participants asked to enlarge the remit. They wanted to be able to also discuss not only about how to reduce greenhouse gases, but also how to protect biodiversity and to talk about the French carbon footprint. And they were refused by the government. But the participants decide to have some recommendation on it, even if it is not in the remit. So they enlarge the remit, they enlarge the framing. A second example is, it's a really local example, but in France, one town decided to organize a consultation about his seafront, son front de mer. And the consultation was quite exemplary, really good consultation, but some local residents estimate that there were not enough on board. And they decide to make a petition. After, the town decide to set up a citizen monitoring committee to embed a lot of residents, a lot of stakeholders into the studies and the works after the consultation. The city was able to enhance its accountability process. It was another kind of test of trust. So it was about the remit and the framing. Now, the second part is about the pluralist information. Because in the deliberation, one of the bases is to create an informed public opinion through deliberation. And that means that we need to make room for different types of expertise, not only academic expertise, but also activist expertise. And potentially a room for counter expertise. And what it leads to have question about what expertise is useful and which are legitimate in this kind of process. And this question arises in particular in controversial areas. For instance, if you talk about vaccination or, I don't know, about nuclear waste. And it is important to provide citizens what they need to exercise their own critical faculties and help them to make the difference between what is factual technical expertise, what is opinion, and what is interest group point of view. I could come back on it to share with you some experience after. The last thing is about the question of inclusion and quality. Our role as moderator is to facilitate the inclusion of everyone into this kind of process, to give them an equal footing in the deliberation process, whatever the level of knowledge on the topic and whatever the fluency they are in speaking. It requires common rules, and sometimes we co-construct this kind of rule. It requires facilitation technique that, as a researcher says, Marion Carrel, it is artifice of equality. Technique is only artifice of equality. And the inclusion quality and equivalent treatment must be assessed also by the citizens themselves. This is three different guarantee of trust that we have to build in this kind of process and to be able to react when we have some test of trust in the process. There is also external guarantee that could be given by, for example, by a committee of garants or other external committee. It is the case, for instance, into the European Citizen Panel, because we have a lot of observers and we have also a knowledge committee, an external knowledge committee. This is the different stakes that we have. And just to finish, few proposals to discuss together about how to reinforce the trust into this kind of processes. Three things. We can organize better capitalization, because there is a paradox. We have a lot of mini public and other consultation process in Europe and all over the world, of course. And even if we have this kind of process, the trust could decrease. So we can perhaps better keep the memory of what the citizen said in this kind of process. The second thing is to be much more receptive to citizen question, to listen more in a more efficient way, as you say, Mario, before, to the citizen expectation. And this is the question of who could put on agenda a question. There is a really interesting experience, for instance, in Montreal, in Canada, about how people put on agenda the question of systemic racism in Montreal administration, for instance. And the last thing is, the last way is perhaps to propose a status for citizen participant, as we have for jury trials, to ensure that each citizen in a country could have the equal chance to participate to a participatory process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you for the insightful presentation. And before we will open the floor to the audience and chat box or audience giving the questions in chat box, I would like to come back to our panelists with the time that they can use to reflect on what was said in this first round. So we will start with Sarah, and then we will move on to the other panelists. So Sarah, if you would like to use this time for reflection, reaction, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks to the other speakers for these extremely interesting reflections and examples. So I want to also agree that obviously the sort of fragmented information landscape that people are dealing with is sort of one of the factors that can make it more difficult for them to develop sort of evidence, information-based views of public institutions. And so this is something that you know, we need to continue to reflect about, and that public communication to a certain extent can address. I think it is also important to highlight, as one of my my fellow speakers said, that while it is true that social media is sort of taking more and more of a role of an information provider, at least according to our survey, when we look at all age groups together, so the legacy media in terms of broadcast media and the press are still the most important source of information about news and public affairs, and it's only among the younger cohort where we see that this has now been overtaken by social media. I just wanted to, since we heard from Mario about public communication, and then from the other two speakers about participatory processes, I want to go back to a few of our analysis of the drivers and highlight just a few more results related to these areas. So first, as I had said before, political voice is sort of one of the three most important drivers that we identified for trust in the national government, and is also very important when it comes to trust in the civil service, for example. I fully agree with the statements that were made that participatory processes, when they're undertaken, they shouldn't be seen as a means to, at least that's my personal opinion. They should be done for their own sake, and not because we expect that this could improve perceptions of political voice and increase trust. But hopefully they might have that as a side effect. And I think this is obviously an area where academic research is very important. And we're also hoping to, at the OECD, and I know other international organizations are also working on this, to sort of also increase the evidence base on this particular issue. But sort of turning back also to the question of information, as I had highlighted before, we find that our most important driver of trust in the national government is whether people believe that government takes its decisions based on the best available evidence, data and statistics. And here we find that only 41% of people find it likely that government does so. But we also see that positive perceptions of intergenerational fairness and of government communication are positively related to trust, among obviously other drivers. And just wanted to say, and much of this sort of goes into the same direction as Mario, that public communication can play a role in addressing these drivers. And this is particularly true in an increasingly fragmented information environment. And, you know, in my presentation, I had sort of highlighted this distinction between perceptions of day-to-day interactions and then on decision-making on complex policy issues. And when we sort of look at our information that we have in the survey on public communication, this is again what we find, that sort of perceptions of day-to-day interactions are more positive. So we see that 2/3 of our sample, of our respondents, find it likely that if they needed information on an administrative service, that they would be able to easily find it. And this is in contrast to only 39% who believe that if there's a major reform, that government would explain well how they would be affected by this reform. And for both of these public communication indicators, we also see that, as you might expect, certain population groups have less positive perceptions. So for instance, people who feel more financially vulnerable or who have lower education levels also feel like find it less likely that there are positive outcomes in this area. And sort of based on this analysis and also on some additional analysis on media use and the criteria that people use to assess the trustworthiness of a story, for our last report, we developed a special focus chapter, and we developed certain recommendations around public communication and the information environment. And I just want to highlight a few of those. So the first one for us, which is really key, is since we know that people sometimes feel like government communication is opaque, and we know that many feel that decision-making is not necessarily based on the best available evidence, we think sort of one of the areas in which governments can address these perceptions is to improve their communication, for example, on decision-making, for example, through establishing transparency standards when it comes to assembling, analyzing and applying evidence in the policy-making process, and also communicating about how they arrive at these decisions to the public. And then, as I said, you know, we found, and obviously this is not a particularly novel finding. Turned to much other research on this, but the fact that there are groups that feel underserved by public communication, even more so than others, obviously means that sort of the accessibility, inclusivity of public communication is one of another core requirements that we see. And in fact, aside from the JRC's report on trustworthy communications, here I would also like to point to a report from our colleagues from 2021 on public communication that provides guidance on sort of what can make public communication achieve its goals better, and how in terms of, for instance, how to be more inclusive. And then again, related to sort of the information environment, we also recommend that it's important to support a media ecosystem that obviously allows independent information and pool information. And then we see media information literacy education as important to help individuals recognize biased or misleading information. But just before I finish, if you let me just make one more remark, and this is that I very much hope that for some of the researchers in the room or who are connecting, that they might be interested in our data. And if you Google OECD Trust Survey, you will get to our website where you can find our email address, and you can request a public use version of our data. And we'd be very happy if more people use our data and further research in this important area. Thank you.
If I may jump in just for a sec. Sorry if you've seen screens popping up because for whatever reason the chat box was not working. So I found a way to kind of bypass the chat box by allowing the rights to the people from the audience. So don't be worried if you follow all the many screens that you can see now.
Dario, would you like to follow up not only on the media environment and also setting other institutes in the town?
Sorry, at least for me, this was very difficult to understand.
Same here. I
Okay.
didn't.
Maybe put the microphone closer to you.
Yeah, sorry for that. So I was just asking Mario if he is willing to follow up, and not only on media environment that was mentioned by Sarah, but also on previous speakers and the participatory practices.
Happy to. And now we hear you perfectly, so it's much better than before. Yes, I mean, interesting presentations and all in line, I think, with the same angle that we are taking, just endorsing the work that Sarah's colleagues are doing in the OECD Public Communicators Network, where some of these findings are also extremely relevant for the practical application of public administrations, and therefore this is something that resonates with the other track of research that we're doing, because we're not only researching the impact on democracy of many of these angles, but also how to do better science advice. And Sarah mentioned that the biggest predictor on a national trust level is this: do people think or perceive the government to use the best available science or evidence, data? And on the one hand, of course, there may be some reverse causality also additionally going on, but I do think this is an extremely important angle to think about, because people don't really know what evidence is being used. They don't trust much of this. And just yesterday, I was on the INCSA Europe inaugural conference, meaning the International Network of Government Science Advisors, who started a new Europe chapter, where we will try to solve some of these issues. Obviously, there's no easy, quick fix to this, but I do think that we need to also encourage more this sharing of the information and evidence that goes into decisions. The European Commission does quite a lot of this, but I admit even I have trouble sometimes finding it because there are these open calls. I mean, the Democracy Shield, as I showed you, but there are also all the impact assessments that we're doing, etc. But I think there needs to be more effort to show that this work has been done and has been considered when taking decisions afterwards. So just to highlight this, that we need to do a better job at this. Before, when people trusted that the process was working well, we may not have had to do this, but now transparency alone is not enough. It needs to be accessible transparency in that sense. Then just to say a bit more of this social media as information provider, I don't think it's an information provider, actually. I think it's the information curator. It's, I mean, many people still click through social media to articles that are produced by legacy media, and that's what we hear, that this is still the most or the important source of information that is true, but it's curated for citizens through their own algorithms that aligns with their personal views. For example, one paper showing that the biggest determinant of of whether something goes viral is not so much whether someone who writes a post has many followers, but more whether it aligns with the views of the audience that receive it. And I want to say this because it's really important, and we will do some more work on this this summer into autumn on updating our previous report on technology and democracy. To see the last 5 years have seen immense changes in this. For example, just today, there was the announcement that OpenAI now no longer opposes basically deep fake generation of any kind of images on their platform, meaning you can now generate public figure images in super hyper realistic view, completely made up of anything. And this is the new reality that we need to that we're fighting, and we see already that this is bringing havoc on our discussions. But also commenting on what the other colleagues have presented, I agree with this listening mode and citizen engagement needs to be with a mandate. Doing it just for advertising's sake, A, doesn't work as we see because it doesn't seem to be newsworthy. But also we see from the empirical evidence that people who participate in these exercises do have at least a small positive effect on their trust in the system, their trust in specific decisions being taken, their willingness to also accept outcomes that may not align with their views. But we also see that this dissipates over time and even may be negative if there's no proper follow-up on this. And so this perfectly aligns with what we would also say. The listening part needs to be really integrated into the process of policymaking itself. To say, yes, whatever comes out of this, it doesn't have to determine the policies, but it has to have a credible impact on what we discuss about this. And an example that was presented just by another colleague a couple of weeks ago is that in the UK, if you signed one of these petitions that then achieves a high enough threshold to be discussed in the parliament, you get an automatic email inviting you to the discussion on that very topic. I mean, I think that's the way to go, that people see it's not going into the void. I'm not providing comments that no one takes up, but I'm actually getting an automatic service that allows me to follow what's going on. Now, whether these debates that then follow are worthy the discussion that they wanted is another question, but we need to experiment with that, need to see what works and innovate on that more. I think I'll leave it there because I also want to leave time to discuss after.
Thank you. And Mia, if you like to follow up, the mic is yours.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I think I will take up on Sarah's comment about that the news media landscape needs to become more independent and more autonomous on one hand. And I will also take on Mario's comment that social media are more like news creators rather than news providers. So to connect these comments with what I presented earlier, I think that one of the most disappointing remarks that were out of Demotech was that journalists themselves actually admit their share of contributing to this democracy malaise. In the sense that they admit the entanglement of news media with politics, and most importantly, their problem is their financial survival. And the more the media are asked to monetize content, the more superficial this content becomes. So coverage which is more useful, more explanatory, more civic oriented is going to be less and less evident on news media. And another important remark has to do with how the political system, whether it is local authorities or governments, actually operate. Because what was evident was that the final conclusion is that what they said is that as long as these processes, whether it's democratic innovations, whether it's mini publics or participatory budgeting, as long as these processes are transparent, inclusive, and impactful, the journalist will follow, and this will trigger coverage. But when journalists who are quite distrustful of the political parties and the political system in general, as long as they perceive these attempts to be attempts just for the sake of doing something, journalists will turn their back on them.
Thank you. And last but not least, Judith, if you'd like to comment, please.
Yes, and I share your concern, Leah. The health of the media is also the health of democracy. So it is an important point. I would like to highlight some points. First of all, but if of course it's not your main discussion, it is the main discussion in my field of practitioner. But today the deliberative methodologies are mature. They works, but what we have absolutely to develop and to enhance, to improve, it is an accountability process. If we want to have more trust from citizens into institution, the institution must be really exemplary on the accountability process. The European Commission is really exemplary on it, but it's not always the case in other also in local field or also in national field. So it is an issue. But if I come back about the question of information, the problem is that into mini public, it is really a really good laboratory to have an informed trust. But the question is, it works with the people inside. For instance, in the European citizen panel, we have 150 citizens from the 27 member states, and they will have a really good information and time to discuss and room to discuss about it with experts. I say that because last weekend we just launched the new European Citizen Panel. It is on the European long-term budget. So they will have time to discuss on it. They will have time to discuss with experts. They will have time to share and to familiarize with information, because we do quiz, we do reverse conferences, we do a lot of things like that. But the question is not for this 100 citizens. The question is for the 400 million other citizens of Europe. How could we be able to have the same level of quality, standard of quality of information prepared for citizens, for the kind of mini public and for the maxi public, for all the population? This is a key issue. How we can scale the quality of information, of informed of pluralist information that we have in this kind of process, how we can be able to spread it into the general population. It is a big question, and I'm not sure that the media are really interesting to cover it. As you said it, Leah, for the budget participatory, it is the same. Sometimes the media are inside and they try to cover the process, but it is difficult. It could be a little bit boring. So they prefer just to put the light on 3 or 4 quotes or verbatim from citizens, but we don't discuss the substance of the information, and it is the issue. Well, it was what I would like to discuss with you, because sometimes information is really transparent. I worked a lot in France with the Commission nationale du débat public for public debate, and the information is really transparent. The information exists, but the question is not if it is transparent or not. The question is it understandable by citizens or not? And it is not, because the crucial information are so numerous that you can be, as citizen, absolutely lose by the technicity, by the technical information, but which is the relevant political information that you need to make your own point of view on something. We have to help citizens to, I don't know to say that, to improve their critical capability to be able to understand what are the main relevant political issues into technical issues. It is the same for, I don't know, artificial intelligence and so on. So is it the main goal that we have perhaps to share together?
Thank you very much. And now we can open the floor to the public, to the audience. If there are any questions in the chat? Not yet, okay. Are there any questions in the room? Frederick.
Yeah, as a follow-up to what Judith just mentioned, and this will also echo the GRC. This will also echo the GRC and the OECD report about how institutions should communicate around scientific evidence and more broadly about evidence-informed policy making. Both OECD and GRC reports, they make a strong case for public communication being evidence-based, not just in terms of expertise or data, but also in showing the intentions and objectives behind policies. And on top of that, the GRC report shows that evidence can be a tool for behavioral change. But at the same time, and Sarah, you mentioned that, the OECD report notes that a third of citizens do not believe that government statistics allow them to assess whether government are keeping their promises. So there really is a disconnect, a mismatch there, and it raises the issue: how do we reconcile? How can we reconcile the need for evidence-based communication with the reality that many people distrust the very sources providing this evidence? And in my view, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that as well, there is much to do with public administrations. In that they usually communicate as if facts alone would carry the day. While we know quite well that people tend to trust sources that align with their values. So how do we train public communicators to speak to values, to convey evidence without slipping into manipulation or without showing that they are partisan bias? So how do we walk this line between trustworthiness and persuasion?
If I also may add to this, because it's connected with what I wanted to also raise as a point regarding what Judith said about that there need to be a room for expertise and contra-expertise. And some governments take it so far as, for example, in the country which I know the best, that we have appointed a representative of the government for COVID pandemic to actually search if it was okay or not. And this one guy is presenting complete disinformation about the COVID as official statements. So maybe if what I see as an added value of deliberation and those mini public and participatory processes is that the discussion like this is moderated, is facilitated. In the case of broadcasting, public broadcasting, usually you have facts, contra-facts, but basically it's up to the public to make the result out of it. And sometimes it's very confusing to have those two sides present as factual sides. And you need to navigate the opinions and decisions. So maybe I just wanted to raise this as something that is also going on. There is another question, and then we will turn to the panel. Okay.
It's actually not a question. I just want to add to Frederick's argument and seeing the results from the OECD survey. We see that even if citizens have good day-to-day interactions with public service, even if they have very good interaction, they still do not trust the institution that they will treat fairly or equally other citizens. So it's not only a matter of statistics or evidence from the scientific community. Even if they have their own experience, they don't trust their own experience, but they distrust. So I think there is a deep-rooted political distrust that we must find a way to repair somehow. And I think that this is the most difficult question for us as experts or the scientific community and for the fellows that represent institutions.
Thank you. And now I will pass the floor back to panelists if they want to react.
May I start? Yeah, because I think
Yes.
you made several important points, and just to quickly say this, I mean, we wrote the report, the last one that I just presented, on public communication, but I do not believe that communication is the only, or perhaps even the most important part of this trust question. It certainly has a role to play. That's why we try to give advice of how to do it. But there is this issue, as you say, of is the evidence used by governments being trusted in the first place? And that requires much more a question of how the public administrations are sorted and how they deal with that. For example, we are currently trying to investigate or argue for more integrity into science advice. So not integrity of science, but integrity of science advice, meaning how is it used in governments? How can we protect it being used in the right way? Because we see in some countries certainly the abolishing even of science advice at the moment. And only if the evidence that comes in there can demonstrate the integrity in a sense of what you say, there's not one guy who can say what the reality is, but rather there's as in science, a peer-reviewed process that really ensures that this is all right, then we hope that the trust angle or trust would be increased in the evidence use. It still doesn't mean that people need to trust the administration or the government to do the right thing, because then, evidence alone doesn't determine policies. It's also all the normative stakeholder positions, international geopolitical negotiations, all of this is going on, and it's relevant as well. But at least this would be a further element that I believe is very important to this. So you're right in this. I also want to point out for the last question you mentioned that we shouldn't, or phrase it differently. I think Sarah already mentioned this. What we need as research as well, and that's something I think you could do something about, is the question, what is the right level of trust? Given that we know that not everything that's done in politics is wonderful and great, what is the right level for a certain country of trust in what's being done? It's certainly not 100%. I think that would not apply to any political organization or institution. So what is it? How can we evaluate this? What are factors that you can factually bring to say that the survey results that the OECD has are actually right or not, or for whom? I think we need more work on this to be able to pair the perception to the reality on the ground. So that would be my short comment on this.
Thank you very much. Are there somebody else who wants to react? Is there? Yeah. In the group? In the screen. In the screen, okay. So it's Judith?
Yes, I find it's really a good question that you ask, Mario. What is the relevant level of trust that we are needed? What we need is to have, in my opinion, we need that citizen could have a democratic vigilance. We don't ask them to trust as blind people to our institution, but to be able to understand how to navigate between the different kind of expertise. What is fact? What is beliefs? What is I don't know. What is testimony? What is point of view? And perhaps that a role of information is also to, for instance, in our deliberative process, to have training, not only on the topic, but training about how to navigate between different kind of information and to be able to see the difference between information, disinformation, misinformation, and so on. And it is absolutely hard to do because we have a lot of information in our daily life. And I had some experiences in which citizens arrive and don't trust the official information. For instance, I work on vaccination, I work on nuclear, in this kind of field. Some, not all the citizens, of course, but some citizens really don't trust the official information. So we have to make the difference between institutional information and communication and evidence-based information, because it is not always the same. And if for instance, if you have a group of citizens on vaccination, if you begin by explaining them the key principles of epidemiology, they will be able after to understand that some anti-vax are really just irrational. But because before you have just explained that how epidemiology works, not to convince them that we need vaccination, but just to give them key points to understand how to make the difference between I don't know, irrational speech or interest groups and really scientific based information. But it's not easy to do, of course.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Do we have something in the chat? No chat, okay.
People in the audience, they can simply raise their hand or activate their mic if they want to jump in and ask a question. If not, I would like to bring the emotions back in. In the GRC report, unless I got it wrong, you conducted a number of focus groups on trustworthiness in like 9 EU member states, and in the focus groups, people ask for public communication that is both formal and creative, that is both informative and emotionally engaging. And this also speaks to Laya's report, where it is highlighted that to make participatory budgeting newsworthy, you have to frame them with a solid narrative and with a narrative that conveys a storytelling, that conveys a human life, presented as a human journey, and so on. So there is kind of a delicate balance with communications and emotions, and also at times, and this will point at also at the OECD reports, at times of rising uncertainties and at times of difficult trade-offs. And typically, we know that certain emotions, such as anxiety, they can motivate learning and behavioral change. We know that when people are anxious, they learn more, they pay more attention to external insights, and they are more inclined to change when they are anxious. But we also know that this kind of emotions, such as anxiety and anger, they can really backfire and they can undermine trust and push citizens into trustworthiness, especially if institutions do not live up to those expectations. So to make it short, but the question would be, how can public institutions use emotional resonance responsibly and responsibly? How can we frame like very difficult issues, trade-offs, high uncertainties in the way that acknowledge concern and fear without losing legitimacy?
So Frederick's question is about how to bring fear into public communication, official public communication. And Mario is going to answer this.
I'm trying here, but also don't want to dominate the discussion, so I also keep it short. But I mean, the thing that we say already in the report is it's not an easy dichotomy between, you know, emotional and fact-based. In essence, everything, even the standard facts or pure statistics, evoke emotions in the reader or listener. So if it's, I mean, statistics about migration, you can imagine, evoke emotions, even if it's purely a table or a graph of rise or decline of migration. So I want to point this out as very important. Secondly, the research on the use of emotion in communication seems to point in the direction that it's, again, not as simple as evoking one emotion that matters, but it's the emotional narrative or travel that works. So, for example, on climate change communication, what it says is that that what was found to be most effective in getting to behavioral change or belief updating is that you first start with fear, yes, to show the scale of the issue, but then you don't leave it there because that makes people, go inwards. But then you end on a hopeful note with a call to action. So this kind of emotional travel is important. And this relates to the last point that I didn't really talk about in our task. Communication is not easy. It's not a thing that everyone can do or everyone can do well. I mean, we can all type stuff or talk, but whether we transport the communication in such a way that it resonates with people, that is a skill and that needs to be learned and trained. And therefore, we call for more, resources for this, but also for exchanging more on what works. I've been, I mean, with our work, we've also interviewed a lot of public communicators, and something I come back to over and over is that the metrics that I used for seeing whether something went well or worked is the number of likes and shares nowadays, because the platforms supply this for free, right? I mean, you put this on and then you say, oh, great, we had 2,000 likes and 50,000 impressions. But that doesn't tell us anything. I mean, you all know this as researchers, but what does it mean? Do we know whether it changed what we wanted to change? Did it inform people what we wanted to achieve? Did it increase trust or actually decrease trust because people got freaked out and that's why they shared it? And that kind of research is needed because the research in public communication is dominated a lot by the kind of marketing studies, where the goal is to sell a product. But in democracies, we're not selling a product. We are trying to create agency in citizens, foster public debate, and if people follow our report, perhaps even create trust. And these are much more complicated issues, and we need more research on this. So, yeah.
If I may jump into this, I can share a little bit of what we research in TrueDem Project. We actually try to follow the frames of attributes on trust in shared and liked or reacted and shared posts of politicians in our 12 countries. And what we found out is that usually people like or react liked a lot about emotional posts or personal content, but actually when they share, those frames are mostly about competency, about public policies and competency framing. So it aligns with what Sarah was mentioning in her presentation, that basically what people expect from national government is competence or evidence-based decisions. So this somehow reflects also in the content that people like to share, not like reaction, but share on Facebook. So we follow this on Facebook. Are there any other comments or reactions from panelists or from audience? And Celine, please.
Yes, thanks a lot to all of you, I mean, for all the wonderful presentation and I mean answers. And so I have basically 2 or 3 comments, questions. First, it was a comment to Mario, but which is a question, but which can be linked to others. In a way, I mean, yeah, it is linked to others. And it's linked to what Judith said at the end. Yeah, in a way, when I was listening to you, and I am a European studies person, and when I was listening to you, I was saying first I thought, okay, that's again the same neo-functionalist idea that once you begin, I mean, if you want people to be taken in you have to educate elites, and elites will educate citizens, and you mobilize, community mobilization that will bring you into trust and support for the system. Sorry, and
Leah, please turn off your mic.
Sorry.
And so that was my first, and then I saw what you've been doing and everything, and listening to Judith, what she said, I think to the last question was, we have to educate citizens, but we have to educate them on how they should, be concerned about the information that they have, not educate them on what we're doing and everything, but first things is to educate them on, as you said as well, OpenAI, it's producing images that doesn't exist, and there's lots of information like this that, we've been trying to build here, in fact, for our students to realize they really need something that is a training on, social media and everything, and it's taught for the first time this year. I don't know if it will work, but probably you've been thinking in all your different institution on, what shall be done on that and how to, and maybe in all, that means in all in our university, our curriculum at school and everything, that should be something that should be there. And so, I would like to know what you think about that. And from Mario, in the TrueDem Project, we have some focus groups and citizens in 6 countries, and we use one of the communication, one of the communication work, which was on, everywhere, on why you should vote for the European election. And so we have reaction to that. And that was, we haven't analyzed it yet, but it might be of interest to you as well. And concern publics and many publics and participants, and I was wondering, are there evaluation on how people react? And which kind of evaluation? Because it's a public policy, but it's a public policy chosen by citizens. And do you have data on the, maybe different ways citizens evaluate things that they know have been decided by participatory budget, for example, and other policies, considering that they could be, obviously you should consider them if they are really close in the kind of this, not in the decision taken, but in the subject, in the issue that where people were deciding about.
Okay, so please, we have last 10 minutes, so we can take around panelists if they want to react on those 3 questions. Let me see.
If I might, I don't think I can really reply as such to the questions, and especially the question of like what can be done. But just to say that I think there are 2 data points that are also interesting here to consider. And the first one is So in our most recent Wave of the Trust survey, we asked people also to sort of rate the most important issues facing their country. And, inflation, cost of living came out by far as the most important one. But then, in some countries also immigration was very important, or security matters. But sort of on average across countries, we also had 11% of respondents who thought that mis and disinformation was, again, among the top 3 issues facing their country. And in some countries, this was over 20%. Which, you could say, oh, well, it's only a fifth, but still, like, I mean, I think we can all think of like various issues facing our country, and I'm not sure for me that mis and disinformation would make it on my top 3. So just to say, because we're talking about the importance of education and helping people discern mis and disinformation, which, given all the technological developments, is going to become harder and harder for all of us. But I also want to say, I think there is also a demand side for this. It's not that, this is just something that governments want to do and, sort of impose on people. But I think that there is, at least among certain parts of the public, also this desire of being able to handle and understand. So that's one data point I thought was interesting in this debate. And then just some of the other discussion around, like, well, people, we say communicate more openly, show your evidence more, but then people might not even trust that evidence. And I think that this is certainly an issue. So in our survey, we found that 16% neither found government statistics trustworthy nor media. So then you're like, okay, so for these people, where are they supposed to turn? And how can we even think that they would be like, if they don't have any trustworthy source of information, clearly we can't believe that they will have the opportunity to sort of build an opinion about whether government is trustworthy or not. So sorry, not directly addressing the questions, but I thought it was relevant nonetheless.
I just jump in very quickly, but I think Leah and Judith may have more to say on the education angle, because that's not what we looked at too, and therefore I cannot respond really. Share your data on the why people think they want to vote at the European election. Just looking, I mean, people here will be very interested in this. With that, I have no other answers to this other than we probably, I mean, normally I don't say this, but to this crowd, I think this makes sense. We need more research and on this angle.
Okay, and Judith or Leah, if you want to react.
Yes, really shortly to answer. I don't know if it is an answer to Céline. I don't know how to improve the education. I don't know if it is at school. Of course, it is at school and not only at school. It's a question of popular education. We need to be able to educate people all the long of the life, not only during the first years at school. It's something. It's really a big concern, the misinformation, and we need to put more means, more budget on popular education and on culture, because it is a part of the answer. But that's something. Allow me just to take another perspective. We not have only to educate people, we also have to educate decision makers about how to frame differently the information. For instance, we can, in some participatory process, we have editorial committee with citizens to co-create the information. Of course, the citizen will not invent the evidence. They will take the evidence made by scientists, but they can help to translate them and to organize them in a way to be more easily understandable by other citizens. It's not only something to simplify, it's a way to think differently about the order of the information in order to recognize the role of emotion, for instance. You can begin by emotion because we are all in this room, all in the world, in the same times emotional and rational beings. So it's a way to ordinate it and to co-create communication and also to accept other kind of expertises. And for instance, to allow testimonies of other citizens as a kind of expertise to be able to have a more informed discussion. Well, it's a way to open also the mind of the decision makers.
Thank you. And unless Leah wants to add something, I will pass the floor to Frederick for conclusions.
Okay, so thanks to all of you for the outstanding quality of this panel, the presentations, the questions, and let's put it like that, the emotional journey that we've been through together. And Christian, if you'd like to wrap it up and have the final say. Yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions, which were extremely interesting also for us, because we are now at the moment starting our policy recommendation and to present our results. At the ECPR conference in August, we'll have 2 panels about the main results of our research. Actually, we are starting a big survey in 24 European countries. And the feedback will start next week. So we have brand new data about trustworthiness in the whole of the European Union, and we will keep you posted about the outcome. And we have this year will also consider the impact of the new administration in America, because we asked also about the president and the USA. And so we will keep you posted, and please stay friendly with us, and we will carry on talking with you about our results. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care. See you soon.